HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Murder of Sonny Liston, Las Vegas, Heroin, and Heavyweights by Shaun Assael. Read by R.C. Bray. Sonny's the type of person that needs understanding. He needs someone to help him control his emotion. He must be kept busy until all that youth and strength leaves him, like it leaves all of us. Monroe Harrison, Sonny Liston's original manager in 1961. Introduction. On January 9, 1971, Geraldine Liston watched an overflow crowd at the Palm Mortuary pass by her husband's steel casket. The crowd comprised the business end of Las Vegas: showgirls, card dealers, casino execs, mob associates. Geraldine, her brown eyes hooded but sharp, studied their faces. Some were there for the show. Stan Armstrong, a documentary filmmaker, would later recall walking a mile from his house at the age of 14 because he knew the funeral of Charles Sonny Liston would be a piece of history. Others were there simply to be seen. Ed Sullivan, Ella Fitzgerald, and Doris Day sat in the front row while the Ink Spots did a special rendition of the 1966 hit Sonny. The last time Geraldine saw her husband alive, she was rushing to the airport to take their adopted son Daniel on a family visit to St. Louis. Even closing on 50, Sonny still looked like he was meant for only one thing. He was built like a mushroom cloud, with coal eyes that had dead reckoning in them, and monstrous hands that punched with the force of a government crash test. When she returned home from her trip, Geraldine expected to find her husband planning his next fight, or maybe playing craps with his best friend Joe Louis. Instead, she followed the smell of rotting flesh to her bedroom, where she found his corpse slumped backward over their bed. So much methane had escaped up his legs that his penis was fully engorged, and his testicles were the size of pool balls. There was an era when Sonny terrified God-fearing whites by carrying the mantle of the angriest black man in America. But that time was long gone. Since the Beatles had put him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, and the Monkees had put him in a movie, he'd receded into a kind of genteel notoriety. Around Vegas, the restaurants comped him. The hookers waved as he passed by, and cops offered him rides home when he was drunk. He returned the favor by handing out pre-printed business cards with his signature to tourists. During his time in the spotlight, Sonny made it perfectly clear that he was willing to cheat on Geraldine whenever he had the chance. When a waitress presented them with a child that Sonny had fathered a few years before, Geraldine adopted the boy as her own, hoping he might finally give her the family she had always wanted. Sonny never became an ideal father, but his fragile fidelity always did lead him back home to her, and for that Geraldine remained his biggest defender. "He acts like he loves me whether he does or not," she said. "He takes care of his home, and that's all you can ask of a man." On the night she found him, Geraldine let the police who were called to investigate do their work without helping too much. They walked past the stuffed bear in the living room that had Sonny's title belt wrapped around it, and into the den, where he kept his prized photos: the framed portrait with his arm around Lyndon Johnson, the one of him laughing it up with Sammy Davis Jr., the sepia-toned keepsake of him mugging with Joe Louis when he took the crown from Floyd Patterson in 1962. The police rubbernecked, taking photos of themselves in front of the photos. For all of its sophistication, Las Vegas was an unforgiving place in the 1960s, and it took a mean and unapologetic police force to hold it together. At the Greyhound station, plainclothes officers kept their eyes on the two-bit con men who rode in from wherever their last bit of luck had run out. As one deputy would say, "We had a blue binder book that had pictures of all the known career criminals. The sheriff used to tell us, if you kick their ass enough or throw them in jail enough, they'll leave town. So whenever we saw somebody in that book, we found a way to kick their ass." The town was deeply segregated, too. If you were black and walking down the strip just looking at the buildings and taking pictures, the sheriff's department would take you to jail, recalls Wilbur Jackson, one of the first African-American cops in the city when he was hired in 1958. On the booking sheet, they'd write NOS. It stood for Nigger on the Strip. In response, the residents of the Westside built their own shadow strip along Jackson Street and filled it with rollicking jazz and bebop joints. But by 1970, Jackson Street had become a tapped-out vein running through the red-lined heart of a ghetto. Riots and civil neglect transformed the area into a badland where few without business dared to go. Sonny, of course, feared no one, and consequently made the Westside's best-known lounge, the Town Tavern, his home away from home. On Christmas Day, 1970, Sonny walked into the tavern with a white showgirl on each arm and ran into Clyde "Rabbit" Watkins, a former pool hustler who worked as a bellman at Caesar's Palace. Watkins had met Sonny when he moved to town in 1966 and quickly became part of his entourage, jumping into Sonny's pink Cadillac when he wanted company and keeping an eye out when strangers started to get on the big man's nerves. Watkins tipped the brim of his hat and wished his friend a Merry Christmas. "What are you doing later?" he asked. "Coming to your house to eat," Sonny answered, laying his huge hands on Watkins's back. To Watkins, and all who saw Sonny that day, the champ was still a force of nature. 8 Christmases before, he had posed for the cover of Esquire in a red Santa Claus cap, looking every bit like an overgrown prison elf ready to shiv a reindeer. And as far as Watkins was concerned, little had changed. Sonny remained a menacing slab of manhood, immutable, impervious, impossible. As a writer for Sports Illustrated once observed, "If a ship were going down, I would look at Sonny Liston to tell me what to do." So Watkins was shocked when he was working the night shift at Caesar's and heard that the police were reporting Sonny was dead. As Watkins would recall it, he grabbed Joe Lewis and Sonny's former manager Ash Resnick, both of whom were on the casino floor, and ran red lights until they reached 2058 Ottawa Drive. Geraldine was not happy to see Watkins. She wasn't blind to what her husband did, but she was old-fashioned enough to think that whatever it was should stay on the other side of town. Nor would she have been thrilled to see Resnick. He'd guided Sonny through his first fight against Muhammad Ali, and it turned out to be the costliest loss of his career. Resnick was a player, and as far as Geraldine was concerned, Resnick had played them out of their retirement. But what could she say about Lewis? Joe had always been generous to Sonny, and was probably his best friend in Las Vegas. The problem was that he'd also just been treated in a psychiatric hospital for a heroin addiction that made him delusional. They were a triangle without a steady side. According to Watkins, the trio entered just in time to watch 2 medical examiners struggling to load Sonny into a body bag. He was just 6'1", but he was thick, and the rigor mortis made him hard to lift. The coroners got him as far as the stairs when one of them slipped and sent the corpse sliding. It landed on the living room floor with a thud. The 3 amigos stood over the body, slightly stunned, and as the house filled with cops, the last thing they needed to do was answer questions, especially after a sheriff's sergeant found a balloon of heroin on the kitchen table below a wall phone. So they left. The discovery of heroin led to a flurry of queries for Geraldine. What did she know about the drugs? Why had she waited 3 hours after walking through the door to report his death? What exactly did she find when she first got home? Was there any evidence of a struggle? She waved off the questions, making it clear that she had nothing more to add that night. Due to Mrs. Liston's apparent shock over the death of her husband, one officer wrote, we were unable to interview her for further information. She would keep whatever suspicions she had to herself until her death. As Sonny's funeral wore on, Geraldine was consumed not only by who showed up, but by who didn't. Her husband kept a large swath of his life a secret, and the people he kept in the shadows weren't about to show their faces now. That included a well-known trumpeter who ran a drug gang and had hired Sonny to do collections for him with a .38 strapped to his ankle. The bandleader had a long track record with the cops and knew that they liked him for some part of Sonny's death, even if they didn't know what part yet. And there was the beautician who dealt drugs out of the hair salon he ran across the tracks. He and Sonny did business together before they had a falling out. Word on the street was that the beautician was looking for a piece of Sonny's scalp. Even stranger was a milky alliance between a hero cop and an alcoholic grifter who became enmeshed in the darkest secret of Sonny's career, the circumstances of his first-round surrender to Muhammad Ali in 1965. The Nation of Islam, meanwhile, lurked in the shadows, as worrisome an influence as it had been during that fight when rumors surfaced that its founder threatened to assassinate Sonny if he didn't take a dive. Ali was preparing to fight Joe Frazier for the biggest paycheck in the history of the sport, and Sonny was making noises that Ali owed him a piece of that purse as payment for taking a dive in '65, although that seemed to be news to Ali. The nation's leaders had as much reason as anyone to make sure Sonny kept his mouth shut. These were powerful people with means and connections, and they had all worried that Sonny was spiraling out of control. In her own way, Geraldine pleaded with him to slow down, enjoy life, and focus on raising their adopted son, who was all of 7. But whether it was because he was facing a midlife crisis or he simply thought no one could hurt him, Sonny couldn't take his foot off the gas. He'd always had a girl or 4 on the side, but he was risking more than usual this time around. He'd fallen in love with a buxom cocktail waitress who turned him on to heroin. And what might have been the biggest threat of all, the feds were beginning to look into the source of the drugs he was buying and selling. An undercover agent had already met with him about doing a drug deal, and there was every indication that Sonny was going to fall for the trap. There was no telling what he would do if he had to start wearing a wire on his friends, but it was hard to imagine anyone in Las Vegas who had a larger or more varied group of people who already wished him ill. That's why those close to Sonny were skeptical when the coroner of Clark County issued a report that attributed his death to natural causes, specifically fluid on the lungs. It wasn't an uncommon way for a man of roughly 50 to die, especially since the underlying cause was ruled to be a lack of blood flow to the heart, a common affliction for people with hardened arteries. But Sonny was no ordinary man. As recently as his last fight in June of 1970, his body looked 15 years younger than his face, still massive and muscular. Among the fights he had won, 9 of 54 had ended in the first round with victories, and 25 others failed to go halfway. I knew the mortician who took care of Sonny, Rabbit Watkins would say in his Las Vegas home, not far from the town tavern, when I tracked him down more than 40 years later. He told me from what he'd seen that wasn't no natural causes. The death of Sonny Liston remains one of the most enduring mysteries in Las Vegas. There never was a homicide investigation because his death was never classified as a homicide. As a result, leads surfaced that haven't been followed, suspects died with their secrets, and stories haven't been told. At the funeral, Geraldine flung herself at her husband's casket and yelled, "I can't even see his face. Oh, Jesus." Then she rose and shouted a question that would hover over the case for the next 5 decades. "Can you tell me what happened to you, Sonny?" Part 1. The Front Seat of Sonny's Pink Cadillac. 1. Hello, 70s. On New Year's Eve of 1969, the casinos along the Strip pulled out all their stops to welcome in the new decade. For $19.70 per person, you could see Duke Ellington and his orchestra at Caesars for the most fabulous New Year's party in town. Not to be outdone, the Frontier featured Diana Ross in her farewell gig with the Supremes, and the Flamingo ran 2 all-nighters, Sonny and Cher performing twice in the main showroom, once at dinner and again at 2:15 a.m., and a no-cover dusk-to-dawn party downstairs in the casino theater with the Platters. Pearl Bailey was at the International, bringing her Broadway version of Hello, Dolly to its main showroom, while Bobby Vinton and Don Rickles were at the Sahara and Shecky Green was at the Riviera. Las Vegas had never run so smoothly or so profitably. The Sun newspaper was so impressed with the way the casinos were vacuuming up tourist dollars, it boldly predicated that the cozy days of mob control were fading and a new era of corporate gaming was at hand. Depending on who you talk to, the paper observed, the corporations, with their business-like efficiency, are either a black eye for the state or the salvation of Nevada gambling. Frank Sinatra was the first one, really, to plant the idea of Vegas as a magnet for stardom. He reached the desert city in his prime, his golden voice a thing to worship up close. But the expectations of audiences were changing. In 1969, Elvis landed in a Convair jet to take care of business and proceeded to become the biggest nostalgia act along a strip full of replicas. Now Las Vegas had become a place where you could earn top dollar on an edifice of familiarity. All you had to do was brush off the old act and play to people who didn't see you the first time around because they were busy raising the kids and putting food on the table. One of the shrewdest judges of show business heat around, Merv Griffin, was bringing his CBS talk show to the Circus Maximus at Caesars and inviting the top names from each marquee as guests for a week-long series he called The Wonders of Vegas. Merv raved about the audiences and the resorts, but the 28-year-old pop star Paul Anka sounded an odd, discordant note. It had been a quarter-century since Bugsy Siegel opened the Flamingo Hotel on Route 91 and changed the course of Vegas by ditching the old Western pioneer motifs for glamour. In the years since, the mob's money had built a luminous strip of playgrounds where the rich and infamous mingled, starting with the Thunderbird, 1948, followed by the Desert Inn, 1950, the Sands, 1952, and the Riviera, 1955. Anka was just a kid when the last of them opened, but looking back, he'd write, "It was not uncommon to see Dean, Sinatra, and Sammy taking over from the dealers and handing out cards to the guests, visiting stars from L.A., high rollers, and so on. There weren't tourists in Vegas in those days the way there are today. It was an exclusive, elite group of people, and the gaming areas were small." By 1970, that had all started to change. Turning to Griffin's show audience, Anka said, "You know, Merv, it's not so glamorous anymore. It's getting very mechanical. As a matter of fact, all the excitement is disappearing." Money, however, was gushing up from the desert. In January 1970, gaming revenues were up a robust 21% over the year before to $44.9 million, and construction spending was rising fourfold. Much of that was due to the billionaire Kirk Kerkorian, who just opened the largest resort on the Strip, the 1,568-room high-rise International Hotel. Everything about the 34-floor mega-resort was gloriously overstated. On the top, Kerkorian created a glass-enclosed rooftop bar, the Crown Room, where you couldn't be any higher. On the bottom, he had a 350,000-gallon pool that was the largest in Nevada. A brochure for the hotel featured stylish couples living in the lap of this newly imagined luxury. "You never know whether you're going to sleep in Paris or Rome or Hong Kong," it boasted, because each floor was done up in a different continental decor. Handling the luggage were valets dressed as French gendarmes. Kerkorian spared no expense when it came to the entertainment either. In the 2,000-seat Showroom International, a venue so majestic it took 2 kitchens to service, Elvis was playing twice a day, at 6 o'clock and midnight, and enjoying himself immensely. Still trim and square-jawed, his glint undimmed, he was on a pace to make $5 million for 1970, a staggering sum, and one he obliquely joked from the stage of the International was due to the Strip's new big-money bosses. Midway through his hour-long set, which included Don't Cry Daddy, Hound Dog, Love Me Tender, Kentucky Rain, I Can't Stop Loving You, In the Ghetto, and Can't Help Falling in Love, he'd quip, "I'd like to get the guy who owns this hotel, that Kerkorian guy, in a craps game with Howard Hughes." Then he'd rip into a killer version of Suspicious Minds. Sonny Liston's name wasn't on any of the billboards outside the curved glass building, but he was part of the scenery just the same. In March 1966, Kerkorian gave the ex-champ a sweet deal on a nice little split level with pool beside the Stardust Country Club, the same place where Debbie Reynolds once lived. Some said Sonny got a break on the $70,000 price tag as a payment for taking a dive in his second fight with Ali and making Kerkorian a lot of money. But hell, everyone had a theory about that fight. If it was fixed, it was the lousiest deal anyone had ever taken in boxing. A police report written long ago described a young Liston punching a man in the mouth and rifling through his pockets for $6. For all the distance he'd traveled, he was still fighting for chump change. Still, Sonny loved Vegas, and the feeling was mutual. On April 5th of 1966, he drove his sleek new Cadillac convertible to the Clark County Sheriff's Office to announce that Las Vegas had a new resident. A clerk handed him something called a convicted person's questionnaire, which every felon had to fill out, and he listed his height as 6'1", his weight as 220 pounds, and his occupation as a professional boxer. He also filled in the space that required him to note that he had been convicted of robbery in St. Louis 16 years earlier and spent 2.5 years in Missouri State Prison. And that was it. The end of the old Sonny and the beginning of the new one. Every celebrity needs a hotel, and when Krikorian's International opened in July of 1969, Sonny found a spot in the keno room and made it his base, showing up in shiny silver pants, polished black leather shoes, narrow sunglasses, and a black turtleneck that stretched against his massive chest. When fans came up to him while he was playing $5 blackjack and staring into his drink, he'd hand them cards with his name pre-signed on them so he wouldn't have to make eye contact. But every so often a manager or a dealer would send someone over whom he would make eye contact with. At the bar, or in the bathroom, or in a leather chair in the lounge, the former heavyweight champion would unfurl his gigantic hand, and inside would be cocaine. Why was a world-renowned figure selling drugs? Everyone sold something in Vegas, but Sonny wouldn't even call what he was doing drug dealing. The real big mob guys came into town with hundreds of pounds of cocaine for the high rollers. Sonny was way, way downstream from that. His clientele was gym rats and hotel workers. Nonetheless, Sonny was involved deeply enough in the street scene to get caught up in a federal drug raid that nearly led to his being shot. On February 19, 1969, Sonny's 4 title fights were well behind him, and fans were paying to see a pale facsimile of the greatest jab in history. He hadn't been in the ring in 4 months, since he'd made a train wreck out of Amos Big Train Lincoln, a dubious heavyweight who was in a career free fall at the Civic Center in Baltimore. And he wasn't due to fight again for another month, when he was scheduled to have a rematch against a soft-punching Cincinnatian named Billy Joyner. On that night, he told Geraldine that he was going out, and he didn't know when he'd be back. He made his way in a pickup truck across the railroad tracks in Bonanza to a place the cops pitilessly called Niggertown. His destination was a squat ranch home with a waist-high fence around it on the run-down corner of Duke Avenue and Castle Street that belonged to Earl Cage, a beautician who owned a salon, Earl's Beauty Cage. A roundish man with a pencil mustache and hair that was slicked back, Cage was no one's idea of a movie star, but he had a way with women, especially other men's wives. He'd massage hair relaxer into their heads, and while they were under his saucer-shaped dryers, draw the blinds down over his door. Besides selling hair straightening, Cage sold cocaine and heroin out of his back room. The samples he gave his clients were probably responsible for most of the sexual attention he received, but he also did a healthy business trafficking in felony weight, and that was what kept Sonny stocked in blow. On this night, a half-dozen people were inside the house when Sonny joined them and disappeared into a din of music. He missed the 2 cars filled with cops that pulled up to the corner. Bill Alden, an agent for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, was behind the wheel of one of the cars. Alden had a photo of Cage and a layout of the home, and as he pulled to the curb he felt inside his vest for the arrest warrant that would let him break the door down. Once the 2 local cops who were trailing him parked their unmarked car and made their way to the back door, he made his way to the front. What happened next happened fast. He pounded on the door and yelled, "Police, you have 10 seconds to open up." Having no faith that anyone would listen, he kicked the door off its hinges before he made it to 5. The interior had a small hallway that led to the living room on the left and 2 bedrooms on the right. Alden swept into one of the bedrooms where he found Cage sitting on his bed smoking dope with another man. The heroin dealer was surprised, but apparently not too surprised, because he didn't resist. He stood calmly and allowed Alden to cuff him. This was going to be an easy night's work, the agent thought. At that very moment, Alden heard a commotion in the next room, and the partner he'd brought along yelled, "Keep your hands up. Don't move. I told you to put your hands over your head." Uh-oh. That was never good. Making sure his prisoners were securely cuffed, Alden rushed into the next room to see Sonny advancing on his partner. "I was a big boxing fan," Alden told me in his first ever interview about the raid, whose details were conveniently left out of any police report and never made the newspapers. "I remember sitting in my car with my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and listening to the Liston-Patterson fight in 1962. I'd followed Sonny Liston through his whole career, and there he was, standing right in front of me in a gray sweatshirt, giving me the same stare I'd seen so many times in photographs." With Sonny refusing to back down, Alden had the sickening feeling that he might have to shoot the former heavyweight champion of the world. Just then, The two LVPD cops stormed through the back door and positioned themselves in front of Alden and his partner, blocking them from shooting, as one approached Sonny and slowly said, "Okay, now, Sonny, everybody's friends here. Let's just cool it." Friends here, Alden thought. What the hell did that mean? "I didn't know if he was under the influence, but he definitely didn't look like he wanted to be our friend," Alden told me. "If it went one step further, I would have shot him where he was standing." Yet, to his surprise, Sonny relented. He let the officer take him by the arm and guide him out the back door to his pickup truck, while Cage and everyone else in his house were cuffed. "We'll take care of him from here," the LVPD officer told Alden. The reason Alden would remember the night in such detail was that it didn't end there. While Alden and his colleagues cuffed their suspects and brought them to the federal courthouse to be arraigned, Sonny hurtled down Las Vegas Boulevard in his pickup, heading straight to a bar he knew on the north side. A Las Vegas patrolman named Max Huggins happened by as Sonny parked in a no-parking zone and stumbled out. Huggins told me, "There was this kid from the PD, maybe 5'9", not even 170 pounds, and he stopped Liston when he was drunk. He asked Sonny for his driver's license, and Sonny took a swing at him and missed. The kid knocked him back, knocked him cold. A bunch of people rushed out of the bars when they heard the commotion. 'Hey, look, that's Sonny Liston,' that kind of thing. Sonny got arrested. But I'll tell you what, it went away fast." This is what was reported the next day. Sonny Liston posts bond in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, Nevada, February 20th, 1969. Reuters. Sonny Liston, former heavyweight boxing champion, today posted bond after being charged with driving under the influence of alcohol in northern Las Vegas last night. Liston, who was arrested while driving a pickup truck, will appear in court later this month. Except that the case never went to court. In fact, the entire night seems to have been wiped clean. In later years, as Alden rose to one of the top jobs in the Drug Enforcement Administration, he'd remember thinking that Sonny must have had a guardian angel in the Las Vegas Police Department. Why was he the only one let go? Alden asked. It didn't make any sense. 2. Paradise. The section of town that the Listons lived in, Paradise Palms, was the city's most exclusive enclave. Designed by a young architecture firm from Los Angeles, Palmer and Crissell, the Palms was envisioned as a place where the richest and most powerful people in Las Vegas could feel comfortable raising their families away from the chaos of the Strip. Although Palmer and Crissell offered just a few basic models, they rotated the footprints of their lots so that adjacent homes stood at different angles. 3 separate rooflines were offered as well. The futuristic butterfly design with its 2 sides folded toward the sky like wings, the popular ranch, and the basic A-frame. Buyers could also customize their designs by picking different styles of decorative stonework, sanded stucco finishes, and carports instead of garages. With lazy streets that ran in and around the Stardust Country Club, the Palms became a hit as soon as its first models were offered in 1963. Stanley Morgan of the Ink Spots had one of the A-frames down the street from Sonny at 1761 Ottawa, and a few houses in the other direction, the legendary casino dealer Frank Mastorana, a so-called mechanic because he was famous for helping the house cheat high rollers, had the butterfly roof. Donald Sutherland, coming off his huge success in MASH, lived in the L-shaped ranch on Pima Lane, while barely a mile away, Howard Hughes' right-hand man, Robert Mayhew, was raising his family in a split level. Sonny's model at 2058 Ottawa Drive was built on the 16th hole and was a mix of everything the development had to offer. Divided into 2 distinct halves, it had a spacious living area with a triple A-frame roofline connected by a narrow walkway to a modernist box with 2 bedrooms inside. Even though Sonny wasn't much on golf, his neighbors got used to waving at him as he went on his morning runs. Geraldine became a familiar sight, too, gardening in the early morning or knitting by their pool. In time, she bought a swing set and other playground equipment so the kids in the neighborhood would feel comfortable coming over to spend time with Daniel. The genius of Paradise Palms was that it offered the illusion of suburban living in a 24-hour city where fathers got home at 4 or 5 in the morning with sex and booze on their breath. Kids still got put to bed after dinner, and wives met to plan charity dinners. Everyone...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?